Hey YouTube, it's Curtis with Olympus Reptiles, and if you're seeing me, you're probably going to be learning a little bit about some rats and mice and some other fuzzy animals. So basically, this is our rat production back here at Manhattan Reptile World that me and Matt and Joe Wood are owners of. So I just wanted to go over some pointers and stuff to kind of help, because we get questions all the time of, you know, I put some rats together and they're not really breeding and they're not really producing, or like when you put them together they started producing and then they kind of slowed down. So there's, you know, a couple key things you can do. What they really need is a good source of food, and all their food on these racks are back here, and we use the Missouri rodent breeder. I guess you can see it over here. And we just make sure that this is, you know, constantly full. You know, they'll eat it and it'll get to where you can start to see the grid, and then you just fill it back in. Usually, like one of those 50-pound bags, I can put 2 of the 50-pound bags in here and they'll last for a week or more on these. The next thing is you just want to make sure that they're really clean. We clean these about every 7 to 10 days. This was cleaned, I think, yesterday. The better you clean them, the more you clean them, it's going to help with the smell. Like, we have a pretty good vent fan that vents out a lot of the smell, but it helps if you keep the tubs cleaner, and it helps the rats being more healthy. You know, the one thing rats will get, they'll get an ear infection. If you ever see a rat and it's leaning with its head like this, that means its balance is off, its equilibrium, and that's because it has an ear infection. And the way we treat that is we actually take them and feed them off to a snake. It's just easier than that, than trying to treat them and like separate them and, you know, try to do medicine. We're going to feed them off anyway. Like, snakes need to eat, so those are ones that we just feed off. And then also some of the rats will get eye infections. Their eye will start to get kind of red and get swelled up, and those we would just feed off too. But we don't get too much of that. Also, another thing we would get, I don't know if I have any of them. You can see this one's getting pretty old. That's an older male. Female rats, when we're breeding them, they usually last a year, maybe a little bit more. Male rats have had them last 2 years, 2.5 years. They don't have to do all the birthing of the little ones, so then they seem like it's not as hard on their body, and they last longer. I think with humans it's different. You know, women usually outlive men. I don't know, but on these, the men outlive the women. But when they do get older, they sometimes will develop tumors. You know, rats that I've found will develop tumors, and the way we cure that too is we just feed it off. You know, I have some boas at home that they've eaten hundreds of rats that have tumors. So one of the tips I want to give you today is, when you are breeding rats, and so you put a male and then you put a female together and they have babies and everything's going good, well then, say, you know, 3, 4, 5 months down the road, you notice that they might not be having babies anymore, and people are like, oh, well, I don't know, maybe my rats aren't happy. Well, what it is they're just getting older, and you need to constantly hold back some of your babies. Like, don't sell all of them, or don't feed them all off. You want to hold back some and raise them up to mediums, and then you'll switch them out with some of the older breeders. And it's always nice to have some like bigger snakes or something that, you know, you can feed some of the, because you can see how, you know, large some of these, this is an adult male rat, can get. Normally maybe if you have a big female ball python can eat that, but that's usually a little bit big for some of them. But so you want to make sure that some of the ones that you're breeding, you're going to hold back. And then what I always do it too, like, I think it is important to look at a little bit of the genetics. You know, you don't want to be breeding back the kids to the mom, or you just don't want to have that. So what I'll do is, like, if I clean this rack out and I notice that, hey, that when I'm cleaning, I had some males and female rats. When I come over here, if I see that this rack has one that's missing, well, then I kind of keep them where I know that, well, these rats over here in the for sale rack came from this rack. So if you kind of keep track of where your rats are going, then you can be like, well, I'm going to pick one out and put it over here, so I know that they're not related to any of these. Because we go through so many rats, it's kind of hard to, you know, I don't know exactly where the tubs they came from, but I know I can tell what rack they came from. And it's also just kind of good to keep tracks too, so you can see, well, this rack, how much it's producing compared to like this rack, and maybe you just need to fine tune things. So on the bedding, what we do is, this is pine shavings. Pine shavings are very bad for your snakes. Don't put your snakes on pine shavings because it has some oils and stuff in it that are bad for them. But rodents, they do really good on it. And then we also mix in, I don't know if you can see it, but like this stuff here, that's cedar shavings. And it's a fine like cedar. And cedar can kind of be a little bit hard on rats. So we just mix about 1/4 to like 1/3 of it in there. And what that does, it helps keep the bugs down. Because when you have a lot of rats, you know, you might have a tendency of getting mites or like fleas. I've seen, when I first started, when I used to breed them back at my place, I had a problem with fleas one time and I had to go and clean them all out. But if you switch out the bedding a lot and then you use the cedar shavings, the insects and stuff don't like that, sort of kind of keep them away. But one thing too is the water. Always make sure that they have fresh water. You know, even with your snakes, you make sure they have fresh water. Your rodents need fresh water. We got 2 buckets on these because they were just going through so much. It was like every day, and now it's like every other day or so that we have to refill those. But yeah, just make sure that, and then every once in a while you might want to go through, because these lines do get a little bit of buildup on them. You can replace some of the lines. These are, like, you can buy a roll. I can't remember what the price is, but a whole roll of this tubing isn't very expensive, and then you can reuse your fittings and a lot of that stuff, but you can just go through and replace them all and make sure that you have fresh, clean lines and don't get, and it helps keep them from getting clogged up too. But that's the main thing is that I wanted to kind of go over is like, and I think it's more important to keep back breeders on your mice, your ASFs to your African soft furs, because they seem to not have as long of a cycle of the females producing good amounts of a litter. Because I just had someone message me about their ASFs. They said, when I put them together for the first few months, they did really well, and then they haven't really produced in a while. And I was like, well, that's because you need to kind of switch out your males or your females and get some fresh ones in there. I know that when we get, because we go through a lot, and we also do some trading, like we'll trade some rats for someone that has ASFs to get some new blood into our breeding. And when I see that, when I put a bunch of new, you know, mice or African soft furs together, that next, you know, it takes about 3 weeks or so before they actually produce it. You know, the next month or so, they produce a lot. Like your production will shoot up, and then it'll slowly start to kind of taper down. But if you want to keep your rat production up, just make sure you have, you know, healthy females and healthy males. I think that's all. Do you have any questions, Matt?
When it comes to your pine, is there any certain kind of pine you look for? I mean, it's going to be kiln dried or anything like that with your cedar?
Yeah, mostly like it will say kiln dried on there. They have like, this is kind of like a more like a bigger flake. Or this is more of like a fine. They also have like a bigger flake, and I don't think the rats even mind. You can mix and match. I get this from our local co-op. That's where I pick up our Missouri rat food too. It's just easy. I go there and just pick up everything I need. And they know that how much I normally buy, so they try to keep it on stock. Also, I've seen people use like wood pellets that you can use. Like there's like horse wood pellets and different things. And rats seem to do really well on that. I just don't have a good place to buy those at. I've asked to my co-op, and they said that they're not able to get them, and if they are, they're really high priced. And I don't have a really good place to get them, because we go through like, I don't know, usually there's 2 stacks of this to the ceiling, so we're going through like 10 bags a week or so. Any other questions?
Yeah, you mentioned using Missouri for food, which is a really high expensive food, a high quality food. I know a lot of people use it like, you know, Alpo or Old Roy dog food. Why aren't we using the cheap Old Roy dog food from Walmart? Because
basically, like rats, a lot of the purposes they have is they do different like testing for rats. Like they have like lab rats. I know when I was in school, we got some rats, and we basically kind of had like an experiment where we fed one rat junk food, and then we fed the other rat regular food, and kind of see like how their diet affected them. You notice the rat that got junk food got fat. So then, and that was basically like what we did in school. And those were like the typical all white albino rats. But so there's been a lot of study on nutrition and stuff for rats. And I think there's Missouri, and then there's a couple other companies out there that make a really good quality rat food. And the main thing is because with us, what we do is we use these for feeders for our snakes. And if you think about it, it's just like the rat that was eating junk food. You don't want your snake eating rats that have been eating a bunch of junk food because it's probably not going to be that good for them. You want healthy, good rats to feed your snakes. So even though it's more expensive to get this stuff than it is to go down and get like a 50-pound bag of like cheap dog food. But the quality of this, because this is designed for rats, is, could they survive on dog food? Probably. They'll probably do fine. But we just want that little bit of extra nutrition, stuff that's designed specifically for them. And we've had really good success with it too. They eat, they do really well, and they breed really well. Any other questions?
That's it.
Okay. Well, we're going to head over to Patreon, and I'm going to go more in depth on the cleaning and taking care of the rats. So check you guys next week.
And like it and subscribe.